Africa and the investment opportunities. Speaking about investment opportunities, there's a lot happening on the traveling front, and now I want to bring in Ilana Meyer, who is joining us here on set. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Abby. Thanks for having us.
All right. Let's just begin by looking at, there's a very interesting report, the Hensley report, that touches on the passport index. And this has a very interesting twist in terms of how African passports are gaining traction globally.
That is correct. Unfortunately, not fast enough to suit most of our business people. So the Henley Passport Index is published annually. And this year, Kenya only ranked 69th on the passport on the index in terms of global mobility, and that index is created by measuring how many countries we can move to or travel to without having to apply for visas. So that's a large influence on the index, which simply means that it's very hard for Kenyan citizens to travel globally without having to apply for visas.
So what are the implications of this, especially when you look at the new modern approach towards the middle class? So we are seeing a lot of people wanting to travel, people wanting to go for holidays, government to government forums. What are some of the negativities that come with this kind of index numbers that we're seeing?
Well, what we're finding is that people are increasingly becoming more global and mobile, and that it's becoming increasingly frustrating for people in terms of their business expansion, education opportunities for their children, not being able to travel as easily or at the drop of a hat when business requires. So people are increasingly looking towards getting an alternative passport, a second passport, or even alternative residency in Europe, simply to be able to allow them to set up businesses in different jurisdictions, travel with more freedom, educate their children internationally. Despite the fact that Kenya has a very good education system, our kids still end up wanting to study in the UK or Europe or the US or Canada, and we have to, as parents, look at ways that we can allow them to do that and then stay and be employed in those countries.
And looking at the ranking that we are seeing with Africa, what needs to change for us to get a better ranking in the index?
Well, Kenya as a country has to close more visa-free agreements with other countries, and that is how your passport becomes more valuable. A lot of other African countries would love to have a Kenyan passport, so Kenya is by no means the worst African passport to have, but it still doesn't offer you visa-free travel to the main global business destinations that our business people want to travel to, or where our kids want to be educated or potentially settle one day.
Compared to other African countries, which would also, if looking at the numbers, which other countries stood out for you, especially now that you're saying Kenya has bad news there, of course, one of the worst passports, but which other countries can we emulate?
In terms of African countries, the only one that has a better passport is South Africa, and yet we have more clients in South Africa than we have in East Africa. So despite the fact that some countries have very good passport indices, they still have their citizens still look for different passports in order to access different business opportunities, to be able to create different business structures, and to get the right to settle permanently in a different country.
Of course, all this border with the very risky element around immigrants, and this has also seen countries being a bit hesitant and shying away from this visa-free talk. But what do you think needs to be the narrative moving forward?
I think the narrative is once we engage with countries, because at Henley we have a very big government advisory division that deals with countries when they start creating these programs, and it has to be a visible win-win for both people. So for us as the people applying for these passports, we obviously win because we make an investment in a solid economy, but the recipient country or the host country has to win as well, because that funds the foreign direct investment. So the money gets invested in real estate or business or infrastructure development funds. So it has to be a more visible win-win for both sides, and then you'll stop seeing the debate about is immigration good, because normal immigration, not the investment immigration, is certainly a very hot topic at the moment. But once you look at the due diligence that we do before we can accommodate a client and help them invest in a country and obtain that different passport, it's a very different type of immigrant. We're working with the high net worth and ultra high net worth investors of this world. So we are not facilitating illegal migration or movement of capital. It's a very strict due diligence process that is followed on both sides, for us as well as the recipient country.
All right. I just want to get your closing thoughts now in relation to the opportunities that lie, especially when it comes to unlocking trade opportunities, when we have a very sober discussion around visa-free Africa?
In terms of other countries moving more people towards Africa. I think if you look at any international company at the moment, if they don't already have an office in Africa, everybody would love to have an office in Africa, and not necessarily in Cape Town or Joburg.
All
we
right.
see so many head offices in Kenya, and yet the actual Kenyan residency doesn't give you more visa-free travel. I saw now in the budget this afternoon that they were talking about improving the flow of capital and people within the community here, and that needs to happen more globally. But that can only happen if you have that trusted relationship in terms of trade, in terms of the integrity of the passports and the funds.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having
Looking
me.
forward to a better ranking next year.
We will try and assist you if we can. Thanks,
All
Abby.
right. Well, quite a captivating discussion there with Ilana, just walking us through some of the key highlights of the report. And we now